July 2019, that's when many Americans learned who he was.
Billionaire Jeffrey Epstein is expected to appear in federal court in Lower Manhattan tomorrow following new charges related to alleged sex crimes involving minors.
Arrested for alleged sex trafficking of minors in Florida and New York. The arrest is the result of a joint investigation by the FBI and the New York City Police Department. Sources
did on new sex trafficking charges. The accusations date back to the 2000s and involve alleged crimes in New York and Palm Beach, Florida.
And then things got weird.
ABC News, that accused sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein has died by suicide. The 66-year-old multimillionaire had been awaiting trial at New York City's Metropolitan
Financier Jeffrey Epstein has taken his own life while he was behind bars here in New York City. Epstein was facing sex trafficking charges. NBC News investigative
correspondent took his own life. He was taken to hospital where he was pronounced dead. It's believed he wasn't on suicide watch, despite an apparent attempt to take his own life.
That right there, that was the recipe to turn everybody into a conspiracy theorist. And so it began. The movies, documentaries, Joe Rogan podcasts. It was everywhere. And we all thought that we knew.
Epstein's clients? Will that really happen?
It's sitting on my desk right now to review. That's been a directive. It's sitting on my desk right now to review.
And then, with things like this being said, and social media influencers outside of the White House with binders, we don't get anything.
Are you still talking about Jeffrey Epstein? This guy's been talked about for years. We have all of the things. And are people still talking about this guy, this creep?
Now, if you watch that and you thought to yourself, like, oh, he's hiding something, you're right. He is hiding something. But it's not human trafficking and things like that. You see, Jeffrey Epstein was a finance, I don't want to say god, but he was good at hiding money. And it's apparently clear in the books I read and the documentaries, that's what he was doing. So, of course, these billionaires, they don't want you to know, how they hide their money. And I'm not directly accusing Trump of that. Obviously, he doesn't like the guy. But at the end of the day, where does this story with Jeffrey Epstein actually start? For many, it just started in July of 2019 when he was arrested. Like, oh my God, who is this? But the story starts long before, way long before World War II, that this story actually starts. With a guy named Sir Robert Maxwell, or Mr. Hoach.
First secrecy is repugnant, currently and historically. Opposed to secret society, to secret oath.
The Great Depression. What a horrible time to be alive. Coming off the roaring 20s and the victory of World War I, the whole world was suffering, including Europe. And that's how Robert Maxwell comes into the story. But then in the 1930s, his name was John Lovett Hyman Hoach. Poor teenage Jewish kid. And yeah, life sucked. It was hard. But it was life. They were living. But soon, that would all change. The Germans, with the help of Hungary, invaded Czechoslovakia in the spring of 1939, displacing Jewish kids all across Czechoslovakia, but particularly John Hope. Being a teenage boy at the time, he would embark on a journey to France where he would join a Czechoslovakian resistance group awaiting the Nazi Germany invasion. Jean was also bilingual in a lot of languages, including German, Czech, Hungarian, and he picked up a lot of languages on the way too, becoming very fluent in them, including English, where he was practicing Churchill speeches to learn English. And while awaiting the Germans in France, well, when they attacked, and well, you know, France fell pretty fast. Jean would flee into other parts of Europe, fighting with other resistance groups, but particularly another Czechoslovakian group, and where he would change his name to Ivan Duvar. But while Ivan was with this group, he grew disgruntled with the leadership, or this is one of the first accounts of him being accused of espionage. But the odd part is he was rewarded with a position with the British government. And this is where he becomes Robert Maxwell. And the crazy thing is he had changed his name so many times. He was Leslie Johnson, John Lovett. You know, it's apparently clear that this guy is very good at reinventing himself, depending on where he is. Much like he would teach his later pupil, Jeffrey Epstein. But back to the story. And while in Britain, he would go on to have an illustrious military career, storming the beaches of Normandy, where he was rewarded a medal, the second highest medal in British World War II history, which is crazy. It was apparently clear that now Robert Maxwell was a very courageous and, you know, he just rambunctious and very bold person. And he had plans. He had a lot of plans. By the time the Allied forces were already in Berlin, Maxwell was already in an intelligence unit with the British military. Partly because he could speak 9 fluid languages at this time, including German, and he was smooth. He had made it all the way to a captain's position with the British Foreign Office with the German section of Berlin. And it was divided into 4 occupation zones, one with the British, one with the Americans, one with the French, and one with the Soviets. It was a hotbed of tension, espionage, and reconstruction efforts. And Maxwell, leveraging his fluency in 9 languages, became an invaluable asset for interrogations of captured Nazis and assessing the post-war landscape. So I want you to picture this. Here it is, 4 countries, France, America, United Kingdom, and the Soviets. They all just beat the Nazis. And now they're in this weird power struggle because nobody likes the Soviets. But Maxwell, well, although he was Robert Maxwell and many other names, he still had ties to Russia, being he was from Czechoslovakia, which is basically, you know, the part he was from was modern day Ukraine. And Maxwell had guts. 1945, he had a vision too. And while in Berlin working for the British right after the war, he was sniffing out opportunities of chaos, and he spots a gold mine in scientific publishing. And you see, the Allies were desperate for German research, and Maxwell, well, he became the guy for getting those papers directly to Britain. By 1947, he's back in London, and he makes his first big move, buying into the publishing deal for peanuts and turning it into Paragon Press. And it's a gold mine. He's not just printing books. He's creating hundreds of niche science journals. Stuff like the Journal of Molecular Biology, whatever the hell that is. And universities couldn't get enough. And he was charging top dollar for subscriptions. But by the late 50s, Paragon got over 400 journals, and Maxwell was a millionaire. He was translating Soviet research too, cashing in on Cold War paranoia. And it was obvious that Maxwell, well, he's seen knowledge as power and profit. I mean, by the 60s, this guy owned TV shows, newspapers, magazines. And at a certain point, he owned a 50% holding share of MTV. But this empire was built on shaky grounds, and it would also crumble. Maxwell, well, he was scamming people, stealing from his employees. I mean, it was just nonsense. And Maxwell's death, well, obviously they would say that he fell off the boat or had a heart attack and fell off the boat with no witnesses. And it was a mystery. And Ghislaine Maxwell, his daughter, well, you know, obviously she says that her father was killed by Russian mobsters and Mossad agents. But in my investigation and looking into this and just trying to find the source to put, you know, to draw the connections, I ran across an article written by a KGB reporter. And I know what you're thinking, DJ, why would you trust an article from a KGB officer? Well, listen, would you trust science from a guy that's changed his name 9 times? This article was written by Nikolai Shurov and Mark Hackard, and it states that John Hoke was actually born Abraham Lasby in 1923, another name to the list. The article states that while Maxwell was operating with the British in Berlin, he was secretly communicating with Soviet NKVD officers. And this was solely because Maxwell was trying to locate the whereabouts or remains of his family that perished in Czechoslovakia. And like I said, he spoke fluent Russian, and he was basically Russian. Simultaneously, he had strong ties to Zionist underground groups like Irgun, helping smuggle weapons into Israel before 1948. The article also suggests that he may have had a parallel relationship with multiple services, including Mossad, M16, and the KGB at the same time. And because of his publishing power and his skills, he became a classic intermediary figure, a businessman, publisher, and possibly an asset useful to different intelligence organizations. In the 1850s, and publishing scientific and technical journals, the publishing house gave him access to Soviet and Eastern Bloc scientists, providing a channel of scientific information to transfer. Soviet academics like Nobel Peace Prize winner Lev Ledoux were published through Bergov, making Maxwell a valuable culture and scientific bridge. And later, he acquired Mirror Group, a newspaper in Britain, expanding into mass media. And according to this article and Soviet sources, Maxwell's outlets became a push for propaganda favorable in Moscow. You see, he had built up a cozy relationship with the Soviets while in Berlin, and this would result in him having ties with high-ranking Soviet leadership to meet with them directly in Russia, and position himself as a trusted Western contact for Soviet elites, a channel of communication when official diplomacy was strained. Soviets improved their image in Western media, and the article alleges that Soviet intelligence valued him as a media mogul with access. And Maxwell, well, secretly had different plans with his Israeli or Mossad ties at this time. He wanted to free the Jews that were stuck in Soviet-controlled areas of Europe. The article alleges that Maxwell teamed with the KGB chairman, Vladimir Khrushchev, devised a plan to overthrow the USSR in 1991. The plan was for Robert Maxwell to use his media empire to support the coup and shaping Western perception. In return, Khrushchev promised protection for Soviet Jews seeking migration to Israel. We also can't forget about a little bit of financial aid to help with his crumbling empire. When the coup took place, it failed within 3 days, leaving Maxwell exposed and vulnerable. And not to mention, by the early 90s, Maxwell was deep in financial debt and owed billions, secretly looting his Mirror Group's pension fund, about $1.2 billion in total. And with how desperate he was and the financial depression overlapped with his political dealings, this made him both valuable and dangerous to intelligence agencies. And the main one was Israel. At one point, tensions had grown with Prime Minister Shamir over the failed coup in Russia. Shamir had grown frustrated with Maxwell, and it resulted in Maxwell actually threatening and blackmailing the Prime Minister. Maxwell was unstable, in debt, and threatening exposure. And soon after, on November 4, 1991, Maxwell was found dead, floating near his yacht, the Lady Ghislaine, off the Canary Islands. The official ruling cause of death was a heart attack plus an official drowning, but the article presents an alternative account. The article aligns directly with what Maxwell's daughter states, is that he was killed by Mossad agents. A method of injected him with poison and dumped his body overboard, but the motive was to silence him before he revealed damaging information, and his sudden death conveniently prevented deeper investigations into his espionage and financial crimes, because they were kind of exposed after the fact. But with all that, we're going to ask ourselves, what does this have to do with Jeffrey Epstein? Well, Jeffrey, he was his pupil, and for better words, it appears that he kind of loaned his daughter, Ghislaine, to Jeffrey. Because you see, after the death of Robert Maxwell, or whatever you want to call him, Leslie Johnson, Ivan, Jeffrey continued the business. Epstein and his daughter Ghislaine Maxwell carried forward that legacy, not just in a scandal, but in how influence works behind the scenes. They built networks of billionaires, politicians, media moguls, and intelligence agencies. They traded favors, access, and silence. And when the stakes got too high, powerful people didn't need to admit what was obvious. They simply refused the questions. Keep the documents hidden, delay the investigations. In a world where leaders may depend on those they can be compromised by, truth becomes liability. The public's disbelief, the secrecy, the evasion, it tells us something. Control isn't about who you are, it's about what you can't say.